Hello, I'm Hamad Husain. My MBA project title is Nationalization Law and the Workforce, a case study of Kuwait. This is my MBA project presentation, and I'm supervised by Dr. Jackie Jeffrey. This is our agenda for the presentation. The increased oil business in the Gulf region has come both as a blessing and a curse. On one hand, there was an added source of revenue which boosted the region's wealth, but on the other hand, the significantly increase in the expatriate workforce has existed to date. The issue has adversely impacted the locals because there are fewer employment opportunities. Kuwait, one of the GCC countries which faces the challenge of creating more employment opportunities for its citizens, instituted a localization policy to limit the number of foreigners to increase the locals in the private sector. However, the Kuwaitization process has not realized substantial improvements in the number of locals gaining employment opportunities in the private sector. Many reasons were behind the unsuccessful implementation of nationalization policy will be presented, thus, there is a need to investigate this phenomenon. To talk briefly about the background, and starting with localization, localization is a government initiative which entails recruitment of the native-born population in specific jobs or industry sectors. As stated by Bose and Day, the concerned governments introduce localization policies to facilitate knowledge and skill enhancement for their citizens, which forms part of their ethical requirement as a multi-level process that aims to minimize reliance on expatriate workforce and to prepare local citizens to occupy employment positions of the foreigners. Watson et al. Points out that every country has specific criteria for implementing localization policies, but most of the approaches entail career management, recruitment and selection, training and development, and also compensation policies for local employees. The second part I would like to explain briefly in the background, which is human resource development or HRD theory. The early definitions of HRD dwelt on adult learning with emphasis on training and development as well as career development. Presently, HRD theory borrows from various fields such as education, economics, management science, and behavioral science. However, GCC lacks a comprehensive HR model. The only notable HR model is by Afuni, which provides a helpful background to discuss HRM aspects in the region. Still, there is a need to delve deeper in the relationship between HRM in these countries and various factors to develop a working HR theory in the GCC. As of today, the HRM scene will remain unclear until the impact of nationalization policies are well understood in the international level. Localization in the GCC and Kuwait. The GCC believed that the influx of foreigners posed a national and social security threats, and therefore, for this reason, these countries instituted localization policies to help solve problems as underemployment, government budget strain, and over-reliance of foreign workers. However, according to the World Economic Forum, this situation has roots in the massive demand of non-national labor after the oil boom, coupled with a pervasive protective attitude by governments towards their own citizens. As you can see on the right top corner, data from the World Economic Forum shows that the unemployment rate among youth in the GCC countries compared to overall unemployment, which is significantly higher than the overall unemployment. Kuwait is a small developing country that drives its revenue mainly from oil products. The country hosts 2.8 million expats compared to the local population, which is 1.3 million, according to Gulf 7 at the year 2015. According to Al-Ajmi, the local workforce in this country is divided between the private and the public institutions. Latest data captured by the Central Statistical Bureau records that Kuwaiti citizens weighs only 4.4% out of the private sector in the country. And to address this issue, the Kuwaiti government introduced its localization policy, Kuwaitization law, in early 2000s. The Kuwaiti government has introduced specific changes also to attract its citizens to private sector jobs. Uh, Attractions such as increasing financial incentives by 66%, and also in addition, mandatory quotas were set for the employment of Kuwaiti nationals in specific industries. The table on the left shows social allowance paid to Kuwaitis working in the private sector and how the incentives increased from the year of 2008 until 2013. The table on on the right shows the revised quotas for the employment of Kuwaitis nationals in the private sector. One of the main challenges to Kuwaitization is that most of the Arab youth are reluctant to take up employment positions in the private sector because of more paid holidays, security and safety, and shorter working hours, which they enjoy in the public sector. Second reason is the political effect of Kuwaitization policy, which borrows from the localization concept, which suggests that politicians pass specific regulations for self-benefit only. Another challenge facing the implementation of Kuwaitization law is the perspective of locals who still do not understand the significance of employment. As Gulf 7 observes, Kuwaitis are notorious in evading duties through unwarranted sick leaves, as opposed to their foreign counterparts who are always dedicated to their responsibilities. The second chapter is methodology, and beginning with the aim of the research is that the research aims to investigate the reasons for the low numbers of locals in the private sector. This research took a mixed method approach, justified by Teshakuri and Tadil, of quantitative and qualitative research methods to conduct the study. Any male or female at the age of 18 and more in Kuwait can participate in this study. A survey can be best put to use to describe the essential characteristics of a sample population. The self-administrated survey questionnaire was shared with the sample population via social media platforms and communication applications such as Twitter and WhatsApp groups. The questionnaire consisted of demographic questions, job, skill, and experience related questions, and public and private sector related questions. There was a need for further research to investigate the issues on a deeper level, which will be best by qualitative research method in the form of a focus group. We have identified the participants who are uninterested or unwilling to join or be part in the private sector, as they will establish the sample population of the qualitative research method. 7 participants have agreed to participate in the study. 3 scenarios or models was shared with the participants to capture their perception and attitudes towards them. Model 1 was the current status of employment in Kuwait, meaning that everything as it is as of today. The second model is equal terms and conditions between both sectors, meaning 8 to 9 hours, 5 days a week, as it's the most common working hours in the private sector, and annual leave of 30 days, excluding maternity leave and sick leaves. The third model and the final model is equal terms and conditions between both sectors, plus having a team that facilitate the transition from public to private. Also a three-year package of experience, training and development program, a career development also in the private sector, and finally being part of a special alumni club of members who transitioned from public to private. The ethical consideration was that the study was approved by the ethics committee at Middlesex University. Before we move to the findings, the research objectives are to study the obstacles to localization in Kuwait from a national perspective, to investigate if demographic factors have a relationship with the perceptions of localization for nationals, to identify reasons why the public is more favorable than the private, and lastly to test the perception, attitudes, and opinions of the participants on three scenarios or models. Our findings was that a total of 166 responses were collected after sharing the survey. We have excluded the participants who were non-Kuwaitis and only included Kuwaiti participants in the study, which left us with 158 participants. Overall, most of the participants were between the age of 24 to 34, followed by the age category of 18 to 24. Most participants were married, and also as for a work experience, most of participants were newly graduates, followed by 1 to 3 years of experience. 75% of overall participants had bachelor's degree, followed by 11% were master's graduates. Advantages of the public sector were as follows. Working hours was the highest advantage, and then the security and safety, and then annual leaves. As for the disadvantages of public sector, there were career development, working environment, salary and wages. For the private sector, the advantages were salary and wages, career development, and working environment. And lastly, the disadvantages of the private sector, long working hours was the highest, followed by stress at work, and security and safety. Most participants have recorded that they are employed in the public sector. However, the majority consider working in the private sector. Focus group results were that the main highlight in Model 1 is that with fewer working hours, employees can reserve some time for personal businesses and to spend it with their family members. No participant would choose to work in the private sector in current terms and conditions from the focus group participants. In Model 2, where equal terms and conditions such as working hours and annual leaves were applied, 5 out of 7 participants would still prefer public over private because of its job security and less work stress. In the last model, on top of Model 2, a 3-year package of training and development with special benefits. 3 members out of 7 opined that training and development are so essential that they cannot ignore if offered in the private sector. Some of the themes captured and was highlighted often from the participant responses were the role of wasla, or personal connections. Another participant said that traditions may affect families accepting female to work in the private sector as well. A couple of participants shared the same point that working environment in the private sector can be very different to adapt to compared to the nature of the Kuwaiti culture, thus making it harder to adapt or make connections at the workplace. After comparing this research to previous studies and discussing the possible recommendations and solutions, these are briefly some of the recommendations included in the research. Equipping the schools and universities with suitable teaching staff and teaching materials to facilitate the efficient training and skill developing process to the Kuwaiti citizens. Second, the government should ensure that there are near equal work conditions in all organizations, including public and private sector. And lastly, create and enhance development and training programs to the Kuwaiti citizens. One of the strong points of this research is that the study was conducted among the locals to understand their views concerning Kuwaitization. It also involved focus groups, which meant that we have a better understanding of the phenomenon. Another strength was a lack of literature in Kuwait on this topic, as well as this being a recent study. Some of the limitations faced in this research are lack of sufficient time to collect data, no physical presence in the study area while conducting the focus group. Focus groups was conducted online, which prevented the observation of non-verbal communication. And one major limitation of this research is that it failed to seek the opinion of recruiters in both sectors. That brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope it was very interesting for you, and thank you for your time.